Hello and welcome back to the Irish Mammy channel. Today is tomato planting day. I have them all laid out here behind me in this middle bed, and I have peppers there at the front as well. So I have way too many tomato plants, more than I need, but that's the usual story. I've never known me to plant the exact right amount of tomatoes. I think there's something in every gardener: when they start sowing tomatoes they don't know when to stop. So I'll have lots of extra plants to give away. Probably will end up throwing some out. That's always the way it always ends up happening. But I have 4 beds of tomatoes to plant, about 60 plants, and then I always tuck in a few on the corner of a bed or something like that. And of course I have a few dwarf varieties that I might stick in at home in the greenhouse at home, or even in containers. So I have lots of tips and tricks for planting tomatoes. The first job I have to do today though is choose which tomatoes are going to what bed, and when I have that done I'll come back to you. Okay, so I finally got my varieties chosen, or the amount of each variety chosen that I'm going to grow. It was a big decision. Oh, it's like choosing your favourite child. Yeah, so I have 4 groups of 15, so 60 plants, and like I said, there'll be a few extras thrown in corners of beds and at home as well. So I wanted to talk all about tomatoes. It is one of the most rewarding vegetables you can grow in your garden, but you do need heat, in the shape of a greenhouse or a polytunnel, in Ireland at least. Maybe in the south of Ireland you might get away, along the southern coast might be just warm enough. But because we're such a wet country, the only difference in winter and summer with us is whether we have cold rain or warm rain. And tomatoes are very susceptible to fungal diseases, so even if we do get a nice warm summer, if it's wet, you're really going to be your tomatoes are really going to be affected with all sorts of viral issues, viral diseases. Some of the most common ones are, I think it's called verticulum and fusarium wilt, and of course tomatoes are also susceptible to blight. They're a member of the Solanaceae family, I think it is, or nightshade family. They're related in some ways to potatoes as well, and peppers. So for that reason they're one of those plants that are susceptible to blight. So to make everything simple, the handiest way to grow them is indoors under cover, but obviously they need light. So I'm growing mine in the polytunnel. I have tried them outdoors numerous times and with no success. I can't say I have harvested a tasty tomato from outdoor grown tomato plants, because there's a chance you will still get fruit, but it'll take them ages to ripen, and they just don't have the flavour that you get when they're grown in the heat. I think it's due to all the rain as well. You can probably imagine it just makes the tomatoes more watery tasting. It completely dilutes the taste of them. So I don't recommend growing them outside in Ireland, with the exception of possibly a hanging basket. Usually they're in a little bit more protected of an area, so they might not get as much rain. But honestly, if you want to grow in a pot or a hanging basket, I would say the best place to put them is in a conservatory if you have one, because that way you'll be guaranteed they're kept dry. So, a few things tomatoes don't like. They don't like to be wet, hence not growing them outside. They don't like their foliage to be wet. And watering, even, you're probably better to only water maybe twice a week, but water really, really well. Now I have a drip system here in the tunnel, so I don't, because I have so many other types of plants growing, I prefer to water every day, but that's because there's so many other plants growing as well. But if you have a choice and you have your tomatoes on a separate drip system or their own drip system, I would say water deeply and water twice a week. Because actually tomatoes are better kept a little bit stressed. They will produce more fruit and produce fruit faster if they get a little bit stressed. So most of the time you're not trying to stress out your plants because they're going to go to seed, but what you want with your tomatoes is for them to produce seed, which is the fruit. So keeping them a little bit stressed is definitely probably better in the long run for your tomatoes. Also, because we have such a short growing period here in Ireland, we need to take out side shoots and we need to cut the plant off at the top. I would say the end of July or certainly the first week of August, and that way any fruit that is on your plant at that stage will have time to fully develop and ripen before the end of the season. Your tomato plant will grow on till October and November till it gets the first frost, and you can imagine if it's under cover, it takes later for it to get hit by the first frost. But once the heat of summer is gone at the end of August, your tomatoes don't taste the same for some weird reason, and I think it's just because there's so much less sunlight, and the sun it's getting as well, you know, the sun is lower in the sky at that stage, so it's not getting as good a sun as it has been getting for May, June, July and August, obviously when the sun's at its highest in the sky. And again, they start to get that kind of watery taste, and you know, that's fine if you're making sauces. It's not so bad. You can actually still make sauces from those tomatoes, and maybe add some tomato puree just to deepen the flavour of the sauces. Or even if you roast the tomatoes, that'll help concentrate the flavour as well before you turn it into sauce. So there's ways around it, but for your optimum tomatoes, you want to be growing them in the height of the season, May, June, July, August, and then pulling out your plants if you have the heart. So definitely start limiting its growth. You don't want it putting its energy into more leaves and more side shoots from we'll say the first week of August onwards. You want it putting its effort into growing the fruit that it has already set and getting it ripened, so that you have all your tomatoes harvested by the end of August, certainly the first week or two of September at the latest, because you will notice a drastic difference in the taste of your tomatoes after that. So there are two different types of tomato plants, and the two different types determine how they grow. So the first type is indeterminate, and that grows about 6, 8, 10 feet tall in our climate, and it's a single main branch of tomatoes with the trusses of fruit coming off on either side of it. We usually keep them to one cordon. You can train them to 2 cordons if you want, but you're going to be probably sacrificing the size of your fruit, but you probably are best to do it with a cherry tomato variety rather than a beefsteak variety, and it's a way of getting more tomatoes from a determinate plant as well if you wish. Generally I keep them to one single cordon or vine and train the vine up these strings. You can see all these strings behind me. So I train my indeterminate tomato up the strings, and they can reach the ceiling of this polytunnel by the end of the season. The other variety is determinate, so that has a much shorter stature. It'll grow depending, again, there are different, there is like a bush, there's like a dwarf determinate tomato, and there's your regular determinate tomato. So the dwarf one will grow really small, and it's really good for hanging baskets or small or containers, but in general a bush variety grows like a bush. It still needs a lot of support, but it would need a different kind of support rather than a string, because you have multiple branches. It's best to actually surround it with a cage or create some kind of a wire frame or structure around the tomato plant rather than trying to tie it off to one string or one stake. So then there are also, like I said, varieties that grow better in containers, and definitely your dwarf bush varieties are best for that. I have one here called Bajaja. I'll put that name on the screen, but there's countless varieties. There's Tumbling Tom is another one, it's great for containers and hanging baskets, and generally there's some sort of a name, some sort of a word in the name that suggests that they're a container suitable variety. So most of the varieties that I grow are indeterminate varieties, and I'm training them up these long strings. So I plant the string in the ground along with the root ball of the tomato plant, and then I wind the main stem of the tomato as it grows. I wind it around the string. Now, very important for indeterminate tomatoes in our climate is to keep the side shoots trimmed. So trimming side shoots is the kind of job that you start off all gung-ho with, and you make sure you do it religiously every few days. But after a while you probably let it go. It's not the end of the world to let it go either, but you want certainly to have 4 or 5, maybe 6 trusses set, trusses of fruit set before you'd leave your side shoots to start to take off by themselves. And so many people ask, what are side shoots? And I actually had my aunt asking me today to show her how to do side shoots. She said she has got a cherry, she's got a hanging basket of tomatoes, and my answer was just leave it alone. So if you have a hanging basket variety of a cherry tomato, you don't do any trimming of side shoots at all. If you have it in a small container, don't bother doing any trimming of side shoots either. Generally, if you buy it already in a hanging basket or a small pot, it's the right variety, like a bush variety, that you don't need to be trimming side shoots or staking it or anything like that. But if you're growing indeterminate varieties and you're training them up stakes or strings in my case, you would certainly do well to keep them trimmed. So I have an example here. So I have my main stalk here, and here is a leaf branch coming out. I'm hoping you can see that very clearly. Now this is a more bushy variety, of course, so I'm just showing you as an example. So this is the leaf. This here is the main stalk going all the way up there, and this here is what we call a side shoot. So you can see it kind of comes out, I just say, in the armpits of the tomatoes. Not exactly very nice sounding, but that's what it is. It's a little side shoot that comes out, and that takes off like another tomato plant. So that's what you need to, these take a lot of energy from the plant, and if you have no fruit set, you actually potentially could have your tomato just keep producing leaves and leaves and leaves and side shoots and more side shoots and more side shoots, and even these side shoots will produce more side shoots, and you may end up with no fruit set whatsoever. So it's best to take these out. Now when they're this small, you can generally just break them off like that. If you are still short of tomatoes for the season, you could actually put that in water and that will root itself. So you need to keep on top of this, certainly, like I said, until there's 5 or 6 trusses set on the plant. And you see I still have loads of side shoots here. There's another one, if I can take that out of the way. There's another side shoot there that has to come off. And generally they can be just nipped off with your nails, your finger and thumb. But if they get much bigger, you would need to take a secateurs to them. You can risk damaging the stalk of the plant if you're pinching off too big ones. The fibres then end up ripping down on them, on the main stalk of the plant, and it just leaves it more susceptible to disease as it goes on. So I'm just going to take out the rest of these side shoots on this one. There's actually loads on this one. I was finding it hard to pick to get an example of it, and then when I found this particular variety, there's loads of side shoots on it. So again, just a different variety of tomato. Some are mad to side shoot and others are not. And I also generally advise keeping away from side shoots. Don't touch side shoots at the very top of your plant, because it's very easy to get them mistaken for actually the main stalk. So you can see the main stalk here, and all of those growths are very similar in size, and it's sometimes very hard to determine. It's not so bad when they're small like this, but when they get bigger, it can sometimes be hard to determine which is the main stalk and which is a side shoot just at the very top, because they're all just a similar size. So I advise staying away from this top couple of branches of the plant, and then when it grows on further, you'll see the side shoots more clearly down, you know, a foot or two down from the top of the plant. I've beheaded many of my tomatoes long before they should have been beheaded by making that mistake. And I'm actually looking at this, trying to determine. So this is the leaf and this is the stalk. I think this is the main stalk, but what I'm actually looking at is little flowers already set on this plant, little tiny flowers. So this variety is called Idyll. It's a very prolific plant, and it grows trusses and trusses and trusses and trusses of a plum-shaped cherry tomato. So cherry tomatoes are probably slightly more vigorous than a beefsteak variety, and usually produce earlier than a beefsteak variety as well. So of course, apart from all the different types, like your determinate and indeterminate, you have the dwarf, micro dwarf bushy plants for your containers and your hanging baskets, and you also then have all the different sizes of actual tomatoes. So you have cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes, plum tomatoes, paste tomatoes, beefsteak tomatoes. So in general, your beefsteak is your huge, big, juicy tomato. I would say a medium amount of seeds in them, great for slicing for sandwiches, salads, stuff like that. Then your paste varieties are like maybe an Amish paste, and in general a paste tomato variety is much drier inside, so really good for making sauces. The biggest pain for anyone making sauces out of their tomatoes to preserve them is having to cook it to reduce the moisture. And I know I've been doing that for many years myself, and as the years have gone on, I've chosen better and better paste varieties. Actually not growing Amish paste this year, which is a change for me. I have found a couple of new varieties, and I will go through the varieties at some stage in the season. I actually think I'll do it when they're growing and ripening, when I have a chance to show you in real life over via video what they're actually like, because I don't think putting pictures up is the same. And me just waffling and putting up pictures won't give you as good an idea as actually seeing them in real time, we'll put it that way. So next I want to talk about actually planting the tomatoes. I'm going to take this out of its pot. So tomatoes have a very vigorous root system, and they're a little bit unique in that as they grow, they can produce roots out of the whole length of their stalk. So in the wild or in their natural growing habit, a tomato obviously won't be training up a string or a stake or anything like that. It'll just grow along the ground, and what it does is, as it grows along the ground, it sets out all these roots out of its stalk, and roots itself into the ground, and helps to feed itself that way as well. So you can imagine, to keep all this foliage and fruit producing, it needs lots and lots of food. But the first thing I do when I'm planting my tomatoes is I plant them as deep as possible. Now I plant through Mypex, as you know, so I can't get as deep as I would like with them. Often when my tomato, and this is actually a fairly typical size tomato, it's probably about, I don't know, maybe 12 to 16 inches in height at the moment. Some of them are taller and spindlier, of course, depending on what light they got as they were growing on. But if you weren't growing through Mypex, I would certainly advise planting your tomatoes sideways, and it will actually bend up over time, well, you could actually bend it up. It's pretty bendable there at the moment, but you don't want to risk breaking your stalk either. So I would plant it sideways in the ground like this and bring the stalk up where you have your stake or your string or whatever your support system is, and then the stalk will grow up the support like that. The tip is to remove as many side shoots as you can see. It lets it put that extra bit of energy into its roots when it's put in the ground, rather than all these little side shoots as well. Now, I mentioned in other videos I had a very, very good tomato harvest last year, and I was delighted because I think for 2 years previous I had woeful harvests of tomatoes. Again, I was dealing with a caterpillar that was just eating everything. It was indiscriminate. It ate everything from brassica plants, tomatoes, peppers, potato leaves, carrot tops, everything, and I've waxed on about that moth for a long time. So last year I done lots to eradicate that moth or the caterpillar from my plants, but I also had another little secret, and I really think it made a big difference in the growth pattern of my tomatoes. And you may have heard of this before, and I know it's used a lot in ornamental planting, but what I used was called mycorrhizal fungi, and it was this particular product here. Empathy is the brand or the company that makes it, and it's called Root Grow, and it's a trademarked one, and it's mycorrhizal fungi, and this particular one that I bought has a dipping gel for bare root plants. Now, my tomatoes aren't bare root plants, but I actually still used the dipping gel because I just felt it was making full contact with the roots, and I felt it could only be a help. And it certainly did help. I can't deny that. I got the best tomato harvest I've got, I'd say, ever. Every tomato plant I had grew really, really well, and that's despite not a lot of attention. I didn't do much feeding. I'd say I fed them liquid feed maybe twice last year, and some of them I didn't even get to support right because I didn't have all my strings hung before I planted them, and I suppose life got in the way. I ended up not getting the strings done afterwards either. So this year I have the strings ready, thankfully, because it was, I would certainly say, a bit of a mess with tomatoes growing and no supports. It was just a jumble of vines growing on top of the Mypex. Definitely it's not ideal. So this year I will strive to do better. Every year I'm vowing something. But this works by, so it comes with a little packet of powder. It's a little packet of powder like this. Mine is couple of years old and it had solidified in the packet, but it still worked. And what it does is it turns you pour a bucket of water, you add your gel powder into it, it turns it into a paste like consistency, something like wallpaper paste, if any of you are familiar with what that used to come like. And then because it's nice and thick, you're then able to put this the granules, because the actual mycorrhizal fungi come in a granular form. Not sure if you'll be able to see out of my hand like that. So it's fairly fine grain product, and when you pour that into the water, then it actually is suspended in the gel. So it means that when you dip your root ball in, or in my case the actual root, I'm dipping this whole bottom part into the bucket. I'll actually bring it down closer and show you. So I have my bucket in here with my gel in it, and I could actually do it stirring it up, but maybe I'll just do that. So you can see maybe the consistency of it, it's quite thick. And what happens is the blue pellets get suspended into the thick water, and then all you have to do is dip your root ball in, and when it comes out, then these little balls are stuck on the roots of the plant. And then you just put it straight down into the hole, and obviously water it then when you have all your plants in. Okay, so the next thing to talk about tomatoes is our watering schedule. Like I said, I'm going to water mine every day. I have the drip set for twice a day, actually every day. But it does get quite hot in the polytunnel during the summer, especially if the sun comes out at all. It gets really, really hot. I'm actually wondering what temperature it's in here now. It's probably about 30 degrees in here at the minute with the sunshine out. But in general, a deep water 2 or 3 times a week is the best way. Otherwise, if you have your drip system little and often, so mine goes for 3 minutes twice a day, 7 days a week at the minute in this height of the season now. Definitely do not water the foliage. You want if you're hand watering with a hose, keep the hose to the ground and just water the roots. Think of it as you're watering the roots rather than watering the foliage. They absolutely hate their leaves getting wet. And even, you know, when they're really small in the pots like this, when I'm keeping them in the greenhouse, it's inevitable that you're going to get water on them, you know, when they're so small, and they do wilt down. You'll notice they'll wilt down when they get wet. But the main reason for not letting them get wet is because they're so susceptible to viruses. If your plants are damp, they're going to attract viruses much quicker. The other thing is, growing through the season, you can start to take off the bottom leaves off your indeterminate varieties. So as each fruit truss sets, I start to take off the bottom sets of leaves. So you end up basically with what looks like sticks growing up my strings here, because I'm keeping the leaves off. So that helps as well. If the leaves are hitting the bottom, the soil on the bottom, that's going to leave them more susceptible to viral issues. And they're taking so much energy from the plant as well, so they're still using energy even though they've produced the fruit trusses above them or below them. So I do definitely take them off and keep taking them off higher and higher up the plant as the season progresses. And as your tomatoes start to ripen, you can definitely do a good hack back on your leaves, just to try and conserve the energy for the plant that is putting all its energy into the actual fruit production. The other thing I had already mentioned is to start trimming them off. Keep diligent with the side shoots, and I'm going to say the first week of August, it's probably the latest time to do it. Cut the top off your plant so that it won't grow any further. Now it will try to grow again, so you need to keep an eye on it and keep it trimmed off at that particular height. So we'll say it's 8 or 10 feet or whatever it is. Trim it at that stage and then don't let it grow any further. And you will notice as well, the side shoots will actually get worse than the side shoot production, because it's trying its damnedest to grow. So you cut the top off and then you start noticing it's putting out more and more side shoots from the places that you've already cut side shoots off. So it's important then to be more diligent with the side shoots if you can. The next thing is feeding tomato plants. So tomato plants are very, very heavy feeders, and they need loads and loads of nutrition as the season progresses, if you want to get maximum production from your plant. So I would say when it starts to flower, start to feed it, and I would use a good quality tomato feed, liquid tomato feed. And there's various ways of feeding tomatoes. I have a little bottle that I'm able to put on the end of my hose, and the concentrate liquid feed goes into the bottle and it then sprays out, and I will show you this through the season as we progress. But the hose basically lifts up the liquid feed and dilutes it to the correct percentage or whatever, and you can just spray it out of the hose. The other way is to just do it in a watering can, which is perfectly acceptable. It's just when you have 60 plus tomato plants, it's a lot of watering cans full of feed, so it's just a handier way for me to do it with the bottle on the end of the hose. A good quality one, maybe a seaweed feed would be good as well. Basically anything that's high in potash. So you don't want a feed that's high in nitrogen, and it will need a certain amount of nitrogen, but I would say a specific liquid tomato feed is your best bet, because it's specifically designed for fruiting plants like tomatoes and strawberries as well. It's really good for them. And I would say dilute it according to the instructions. Do not think that leaving it more concentrated is going to be better for your plants, because it's not. Another thing I like to do is I like to plant basil along with some of my tomatoes. Now I'm not ready to put basil in today with my tomatoes, but I will at some stage come around before my tomato plants get too big, and I'll be putting in little basil plants along with the actual tomatoes. Another good thing to plant along with your tomatoes is marigolds. I love the little tagetes, I think they're called, or tagette. They're a very, very small type marigold, and they have a lovely scent to them. But the theory is that it secretes a substance from its roots that deters the green fly. Now, thankfully, touch wood, I've not had a problem with green fly in here, and I'm seeing this year tons of ladybirds. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. Either the ladybirds are here because they're a green fly, or there are no green fly because the ladybirds are here, who knows. So I'll have a mix of calendula and basil planted in with all my tomatoes eventually, or certainly around the perimeter of the bed. I'm planting 15 plants in each bed, so probably the surrounding 10 or whatever around the edges of the bed might be sufficient. They'd be too overshadowed on the interior plants to grow well. So that's all the information I have on growing tomatoes. Now I need to get planting them. Realistically, I'm not going to get planting all my tomatoes today. I'm going to start with this bed, see how I get on, and over the coming days I intend to get all my tomato plants in. They actually were ready for planting. They were just looking perfect about 2 weeks ago. They were the perfect height and everything. But they've started to get very spindly in the last week or 10 days. But look, that always happens with my tomatoes, and it really doesn't do them any harm. They all kind of come more sturdy once they get into the ground, and they take off then. Okay, time to get planting. Okay, so I hope you can see clearly what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to dig down here. This soil is quite dry, but it will be fine. Now, like I had already said, I can't get down as deep as I would like, so that will have to do. I'm going to remove some of the side shoots. Not very many side shoots on this plant, and they've got quite a bit wilty sitting here. And I'm going to dip the plant into the gel. And down it goes into the hole. Actually, nearly forgot. So I make sure that this string that I'm growing it up is underneath the root ball. And then I'm just going to settle the soil in around the root ball of the plant to make sure it's fully settled in. And then I'm just going to wind it around the bit of the plant. And there we have it. One down, 15 to go in this bed, and then another 45 after that. Okay, we're well on with the plant and one bed down now. I'll just turn the camera around and let you see. So I know one thing I forgot to mention in all my spiel was the spacing, plant spacing. And I had said I was going to put 15 plants in this, and true to form I changed my mind when I realised there's actually 20 holes in this bed. Zoom out there a little bit. And yeah, so I only had 15 strings. I then proceeded to put in these bamboo sticks, and I'll have to get some twisty tie to tie the actual plants to them. If you can see, they're actually in limbo at the minute. They're just sitting there beside them. So I've squeezed 20 plants into this. It's the most I've ever put in a bed, I think, and I may regret it, but hopefully not. So I would say they're roughly 18 to 24 inches apart. More on the 18 side than 24. But that is a good enough size, especially when you're going to keep them trimmed down and trained to one cordon. That should be sufficient spacing. It might get a little bit overcrowded at times, but once I get all my side shooting and my leaves taken off, it should be fine. And there'll be plenty of updates during the year or during the season as these plants progress and start to produce fruit. So I'm after giving them a really good deep watering, settle them in the soil, and all my other plants are sitting here wilting in the heat, as am I wilting in the heat at the minute too. So I've given everything a really good drink, and I'm going to come back when it's a bit cooler this evening and get the rest of my plants in the ground. Or no, not even the rest. I'll get another bed done maybe, and then maybe another bed in the morning early before the sun gets too hot. And I'm talking about it getting too hot. It's not that it's terribly hot outside. It might be about 15 to 18 degrees Celsius outside. But that translates to 30 to 40 degrees inside here in the polytunnel, and I have both sides of the polytunnel doors wide open, and there's a little bit of a breeze going through, but nothing major, so doesn't really cool you down very much. So yeah, early morning and late evening is the best time to be working in the polytunnel this time of year, and happens to suit me quite well as well. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the content. I hope I was able to get across lots of information that you needed for growing tomatoes, and I would highly encourage you to grow tomatoes if you haven't already. They're definitely a worthwhile vegetable to grow, and anyone who has grown their own tomatoes will say that your shop bought or store bought tomatoes don't taste anything like what you can grow yourself. And stick with me throughout the rest of the season. There'll be lots of updates on these tomatoes, polytunnel tours, greenhouse tours coming soon, and progress on all the plantings and vegetables that as they grow throughout the year. That's the plan. So thank you very much for watching. If you've made it this far, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.